Okay, let's talk a little bit about something, a really neat feature actually in Python called an fString. Now, these are, well, I say relatively new, they've been around for a few years now, but older versions of Python don't have this. All of the versions of Python you have will, unless you've somehow in sort of very old version of Python. But an fString, you saw a little example of that in the exercise, one of the exercises last week. They are strings, just like a normal string, but we can include some formatting within that string to define where we want to place some dynamic text. And it allows us to do things like insert the name or insert the value from a variable. So we may have, for example, a print message in our code that says her name is. Now, if it's the user's name, for example, we don't know what the user's name is until we ask for it. So we can't hard code, we can't say what the name is in our print statement. We have to draw that in from whatever the user puts in and stores into a variable. So instead, we can use an fString to say, I want you to print this message, but this bit of the message, I want you to use the value in this variable. Okay. And fStrings are really easy to use in Python. We simply put an f, a lowercase f, just before, with no space, immediately before our either double or single quotation marks that are about to indicate our string. And then we write our string as normal, but anywhere where we want to kind of get Python to step out and grab a value from somewhere else, we use curly brackets, and we type in, for example, here the name of the variable that we want. So if we've got a variable called name of user, it has a value, string value here called Dan. I can then print a message using an fString that says hello, and then rather than hard coding Dan or any other name, I can use this fString formatting to say whatever is stored in name of user. So in this case, that will say hello Dan. And you can see I've put an exclamation mark after the closing the bracket. So you can put in more than one of these. You can, and within an fString, you can put formatting all around them and all sorts. And in fact, there's lots of stuff that you can do with an fString, not just that. You can do things like, basically, within your curly brackets, you can put anything that will, any Python instruction that will result in an output that can be translated as a string. Okay, so for example, rather than putting the name of a variable, I could put 2 plus 2 within my curly brackets. Now, Python will interpret that as an integer 2. I need to add that to another integer 2. It'll give it an output of the integer 4. An integer value of 4 can be interpreted as a string. It'll give it the character, the number 4. Okay, so that works. So you can put in little instructions like that. In fact, that kind of mathematical operation can be quite useful to do in an fString. You can also do neat little stuff like this. So sometimes we've got a floating point number, and we want to keep that level of precision because we want to use that perhaps in our in another calculation. So we don't want to round it while we're calculating, but we don't want to give all of those decimal points to the user. It's meaningless. So instead, what we can do, we can use rounding within an fString. So we can say, here's an example where we've got my float, which is a floating point number. Obviously a very famous floating point number here. And I'm using an fString with a print message here. So I use my little lowercase f, put in my message, my number rounded to 3 decimal places is, and then in my curly brackets, I'll put the name of my variable, just as I did before. But if I then add a colon, and then a full stop, and then 3 lowercase f, that says round this as a floating point number to 3 decimal places. Okay, so it won't change the variable value itself. The variable value will remain as 3.141592, etc. But the message will only display that value rounded to 3 decimal places, which can be really handy when you're communicating various results or outputs to a user. Similarly, if I put in 0.2f there, you'd get it to 2 decimal places. I could put 0.0f and it would round it to the nearest whole number. Okay, so it's a really handy little feature that you can use there.